Alright then gang, so for most of this course we're going to be using Node to power the back end of a website by creating a Node server and then using that to handle browser requests and responses. But first of all, in this video, I just want to play around with Node a little bit on our computer first without creating a server or a website, just to get a feel of the basics so that you're more comfortable using Node. So we've already seen how we can create a JavaScript file on our computer and then run that through Node. And we do that by opening up a terminal in the project directory. Now that could be an integrated terminal like this in VS Code, or you could use command prompt or something else, and then saying Node and then whatever the file is called, in this case, test. So press enter and that runs the file. And inside this file, we can write any valid JavaScript. So for example, I could create a function called greet, and that function takes in a name parameter. And over there inside the function, we'll just console.log and we'll do a template string which says hello and then output the name that we take in. So this right here, by the way, a template string, we can output variables inside them using this syntax. Okay, so let me just comment this stuff out first of all, and then down here we could say greet and I'll pass in Mario, and then also we'll call it again greet and pass in a different name, Yoshi. Alright, so if I want to run this, I can do by saying node test, and that's going to run this file and it's going to run this function twice and log this out twice with a different name each time. So that's how easy it is, right, to run a JavaScript file through Node on our computer. So basically, we can use the same JavaScript language here that we normally use on the front end of websites in a browser. Anything like variables, functions, objects, classes, etc. But there are some differences too. The first being the global object. So in Node, we get access to a global object with several different methods and properties attached to it that we can use out of the box. Now, this is a bit like the window object when we work with JavaScript inside the browser. So let me just bring a browser over here so we can look at this window object inside the console. So if I just type out window like this, we can see this object with a load of different properties and methods available to us inside the browser. Okay, so this window object inside the browser is the browser's global object, and it has methods like set timeout, alert, and all that kind of jazz. So we can use all of those methods and properties out of the box inside the browser. For example, I could use a set timeout and an alert, and these are available to us in JavaScript inside the browser. So if I press enter, then we should get an alert after 3 seconds. Okay, like that. Now, I don't have to explicitly say window dot set timeout because it's attached to the window object after all. This is the global object, and so its presence is implied. So we don't have to do that. We just use whatever the method name is or the property name is, and we can do that directly inside the browser. So inside the browser, the window is the global object, but in Node, our global object is not window, but global, and that represents the global context in a Node environment. So then I've gone ahead and created this global.js file, so we can have a look at this global object right here. And the first thing I'm going to do is just say console.log, and we're going to log the global object to the terminal down here. So now let me run this by saying node global, like so, and we can see this global object, and attached to it are a few different things. So we can see we have these methods right here. We have clear interval, clear timeout, set interval, etc. And they are available to us inside Node.js. So for example, I could come down here and I could say global.setTimeout, like so, and in here, we can do the same thing. We can pass a function, and inside the function, I'm just going to say console.log in the timeout like that. And I'm going to run that after 3 seconds.
KiloCode is a powerful, open source AI coding assistant that supercharges your development workflow right inside.
Like so. So again, I'm going to open up the terminal and I'm going to run node global. And then after a few seconds, oops, we get an error because I've spelt global incorrectly. So let me do that again, clear, and then run the file. So node global, and this time we get the global object first, but then after 3 seconds, we get this message as well in the timeout. Okay, let me just comment this thing out at the top so we're not logging that to the console every time we run this file. But anyway, this is us now using a method available to us on the global object in Node. Now, same as Window, we don't actually have to explicitly type global. It's just available to us out of the box. So let me save that and run this again just to make sure it still works. We wait 3 seconds and then we should get this logged to the console, which we do. Awesome. So that's one of the things available to us. Another one is set interval. So let me scoot this down a little bit, and I'm going to say const and int for interval is equal to set interval, and in here we're going to run a function, and that function is going to run every 3 seconds, or rather every second will do, so 1000 milliseconds. So the difference between set timeout and set interval, as you probably already know, is that this keeps on running the function every 1 second. This is only going to run it once after 3 seconds, okay? So now if I go over here, I'm going to say console.log in the interval, like so. Now let me run this again, node global, and we're going to see every second now I'm in the interval, and we see this after 3 seconds as well in the timeout. Now this is going to go on and on and on forever, so we need to cancel out of the process by doing Control-C, and we cancel out of that node process. It stops running the file. So now, what if we want to stop this? Well, we can access the clear interval method as well. So inside set timeout, I might say clear interval, and we pass through what interval we want to clear. Oops, spell this correctly. And it's this one right here, int. So now what's going to happen is this is going to run every second until we reach 3 seconds, at which point we're running this function. And at that point, we clear the interval, and that stops this from carrying on. So let me save this file and access the clear interval node global. And we're going to see every second now I'm in the interval, and we see this after 3 seconds as well in the timeout. Now, this is going to go on and on and on forever. So we need to cancel out of the process by doing Control-C, and we cancel out of that node process. It stops running the file. So now, what if we want to stop this? Well, we can access the clear interval method as well. So inside set timeout, I might say clear interval, and we pass through what interval we want to clear. Oops, spell this correctly. And it's this one right here, int. So now what's going to happen is this is going to run every second until we reach 3 seconds, at which point we're running this function. And at that point, we clear the interval, and that stops this from carrying on. So let me save this file and preview this again, node global, in the interval, then in the timeout, and at that point it stops, okay? Cool. Okay, so I want to show you just a couple more things that are available to us in Node.js without us having to do anything, and that is 2 properties, the dir name or directory name and the file name. So let me log both of these to the console, and it's __ dir name, and then I'm going to duplicate that and change this to file name. And what these 2 things do for us is, first of all, this one, dir name, gets us the absolute path of the current folder that this file is in, and this one gets us the absolute path of the folder with the file name added on as well. So if I save this and try to run node global again, in fact, let me comment these things out first. Save it and run it, node global, and we see this is the first one, a full absolute path of the directory that we're currently in, and then this is the second one, which is the same but with the file name added on as well. Now this especially is useful when we're working with Node to get the current directory of our file, because we're sometimes interacting with different files and we need to formulate paths between them, okay? So these 2 are quite useful. Now, like I said, the global object in Node is different from the global object in Windows. So some of the things in the window object, rather most of them, we can't actually access. Things like DOM methods. So for example, I couldn't access the query selector. So I couldn't say console.log and then documents.query selector that wouldn't work. Let me save it and try this. Node global, and we get an error. Document is not defined because document is in the window object, and we don't have that in the global namespace of Node.js. But that's okay because we don't really need to do all of that stuff that we want to do in a window, like interact with a web page. We're going to be using Node.js on the back end or on the server side, so we don't need access to all of those things available on the window object. Alright then, so sometimes we might want to split our code into multiple different files and then import and export things to and from those files. And this way, we're going to keep our code much more modular, reusable, and also much easier to maintain as well. And we're not just dumping all of our code into one single file. So what I've done to demonstrate this is create two new files, modules and people. And the first thing I'm going to do is just paste in a bit of data into this constant right here, people, into the people file. So this is just an array of strings which are people's names. And I'm also going to log those to the console down here. So console.log people, and I'm going to save it. Now, what if I want to import this people file into this modules file? Well, I can do that using a require statement. Now, the way this looks is by saying const and then giving this constant a name. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it XYZ and set it equal to require. And this inside is going to be a relative path to whatever file we want to require or import. Now, we're going to say ./ and that means look in the same directory that this file is in, since that's where the people file is. And then we want to get the people file. So now we're requiring or importing this file into modules. So if I run this modules file, what's going to happen? Well, let's take a look. Node modules, and now we see this array logged to the console, and that's because we log it right here. So when we require another file, automatically Node looks for that file, it finds it, and it runs that file, which is why we see this log down here, because it's running this. Now, what if I try to log out this? What is this value going to be? Well, let me say console.log, and we'll say XYZ. and save it and run this again, node modules, and we see that this value is an empty object. So this right here is actually returning an empty object to us, and I'll explain that in a second. I just wanted you to see that it's an empty object. Now also, what if we try to access the variable inside this file from over here? Can we do that? Well, let's see, console.log people, and save it, and then let me run this again. And no, we can see that people is not defined. So just because we import a file right here doesn't automatically give us access to the things in that file. We can't do that. We can only access them from inside the file, okay? So what then if I wanted to access people inside this file? Well, we have to manually export this thing right here, and then whatever we manually export is going to be applied to this constant right here. Now we saw a minute ago that this is actually an empty object when we logged it to the console, and that's because we're not manually telling this file to export any kind of data or properties. So how do we do that? Well, we do that by saying module.exports, and this is us saying, look, I want to export something manually from this module, this file, and we set that equal to something. And whatever we set this equal to is what is going to be returned to us right here, and then this constant will be equal to that value. So if I set this equal to hello, then this XYZ right here is going to be hello. So let's try that. Let me delete the second console log and save it, and come down here and say node modules. And now we can see first we get this logged because we do it over here, and then we get hello because that is the value of module.export, and therefore that is the value of this thing right here. So if I want to export this, I just need to say module.export is equal to people. Simple as that. And now XYZ is going to be equal to this thing right here, people. And it doesn't matter that this is called XYZ and this is called people. They don't need to be called the same thing. So if I save this and preview, then we can see now when we log XYZ, we're logging this a second time because that is what we exported. All right, so that's how we export a single thing. What if we want to export multiple different things? So let me just paste in another constant, ages, which is equal to an array of ages, this time numbers. And let's say I want to export this as well. How do we do that down here? Because at the minute we're just exporting one thing. Well, this right here can be any value. So I could say that this is equal to an empty object. And then I could export different properties on this object. So I could say people is going to be people. So we're adding a property to this object called people, and we're setting the value of that property to be people. Now this and this doesn't have to be the same name, but I like it to be that way because then we can use a shortcut which is just to say people, and that is when this and this is the same name. We can do that, and it does this under the hood. It adds a property of people and sets it equal to the people constant. Okay, so I'm exporting people and also ages. That's what we're going to do. So now we're exporting an object with these two properties on it, people and ages, and they're equal to these values at the top. So let me save this now, and if we go over here and still log XYZ to the console, we should see an object with those two properties. So we can see right here this object with these two properties, people and ages, and we can now access both of those by saying XYZ dot people, for example, and XYZ dot ages. So save that and output those, and we can see the output separately right here. Awesome. Now, a nice way to import multiple different things from a different file is to use destructuring, and that looks something like this. We can say an object right here, and then whatever properties we want to extract from this object that's being exported. So if I want to just extract the people from this file, I can do that inside this object right here, this destructuring object, by saying people. And this now does have to be the same name as the property I want access to. All right, so now all I'm doing is importing people. And I don't have to say xyz.people, I just have access to people. But I don't have access to xyz because that's not defined anywhere, or ages, and I can demo that. Let me save it and say node modules. We can see ages is not defined, but we get people right here, which is defined. We don't get an error for that. Now, if I just delete this, we should see this works. Node modules, and we can see this right here. So if I want both of those things, I can say, okay, well, get me people and ages. And now, if I output those, it should work. So node modules, and we can see both of those right here. So you'll see me using this kind of pattern in the future when I'm importing several different things, or just maybe one thing from a different file. So now we've seen how to export and also import our own made files, but Node.js also comes with some core modules built into it, and we can also require those as well for added functionality. So let me down here say, for example, const OS, which stands for operating system, equals to require, and we're going to require the OS core module. So this is built in to Node itself. I don't need to create an OS file. It's already built into Node, and I'm importing that into this file. So now down here, I could say console.log OS, and this is an object with a lot of information about the current operating system that this is running on. So I could save this and say node modules, and we get that big object right here, okay? Now, a couple of the different properties we can use on this object are, or rather methods in our case, are the platform, which is a method, and that finds us the platform that we're running on, and also we'll say the home directory, so home dir, and there are other things as well. I'm just showing you two examples right here. So save that and run it again. And this time we can see that the platform is Windows, Win32, and this is the home directory on my computer, /users/Sean, okay? So that could be useful if you need to find out information about the operating system, and there's loads more things on that. You can play around with it and see for yourself. So there are several different core modules in Node.js. OS is one of them, about the operating system. Another one is the file system. So one of the things that we can do with Node is use its file system core module to do things like read files, create files, and delete files on our computer. Now, this ability to interact with the file system on a computer with JavaScript is something that can't be done without Node, and it's a really important feature to have for any kind of computer program or server-side code that needs to be able to do that, needs to be able to read files or create files. So I'm going to show you how to read files, write files, create and delete directories, and also delete files as well. So first of all, we need to import the core module that we need to do all of this interaction with the file system, and that is the fs module built into Node. So I'm going to say const fs, and you can call it what you want, but the module itself is called fs as well, and normally you will see people naming it this. All right, so FS stands for file system, by the way. The first thing I'd like to show you is how to read files. And to do that, we say fs.read file. Now, this takes in two arguments. The first argument is a string, and it's a relative path to the file that we want to read. Now, I've already created a folder right here called docs, and I've created a file inside it called blog1.txt, and it says hello ninjas. So I want to read this file, so I need to pass a relative path to that file right here. So I will say // to say the current directory, then into the docs folder, then blog1.txt. So I want to go out and read that file. The second argument is a function, and this function will fire when this is complete. So this method right here is asynchronous, and that basically means that it takes some time to do. So I want to go out and read that file. The second argument is a function, and this function will fire when this is complete. So this method right here is asynchronous, and that basically means that it takes some time to do. Now, once it's done, it will fire this callback function, okay? And inside this callback function, we take two things: an error, if there was one, and also the data, the stuff that we read from the file. So what I'd like to do first of all is check if there was an error first of all. And if there was, let's log that to the console. So console.log error. Okay, down here I also want to log to the console the data. So console.log data like so. All right, so now let me run this. So if I say node files to run this file, which is called files, it's going to run this, hopefully try and read the file, and we get a buffer. That is this thing right here being logged to the console. Okay, so a buffer is basically just a package of data that's being sent to us when we read this file. Now, we're going to talk a bit more about buffers and streams later on, but for now, if we want to see the actual string data, this in text format, we can just use the toString method on this data, and it will turn the buffer into a string so we can read it down here. So if I run this again, node files, we see hello ninjas. All right then, I said that this was asynchronous, right? And it takes some time to do. And also it doesn't block our code. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, it's not going to stop the code from carrying on down here and executing other lines of code, even though it's taking some time to do. It doesn't sit around and wait for this to happen before it moves on. It carries on with the code, and then when this is done, it fires that callback function. So let me demo this. I'm going to say console.log, and I'm going to say last line, since this is the last line of code, and I'm going to run this. So node files, and we see that last line is logged right here before hello ninjas, which is up here. And that's because, like I say, this fires, it starts the process of reading this, it takes some time to do. In the meantime, JavaScript carries on down the file, it executes this first, then once this is done, we fire this callback function, and then this is logged to the console, okay? Now, let me just show you this in action, this error.
Guys, panoorin niyo 'to. Di makakuha ng bola si Mami dito. Ikaw pa naman tauhan. Eh, tulad niyo, napikon si Mami, no? Kahanap na lang ng away. Ayan, no? Yan, yan. Yan. Babang dyan, oh. Yan. Nahabis si Mami, no? Hindi kasi siya makatira sa long shot. Tara guys, panoorin niyo 'to. Di makakuha ng bola si Mami dito. Ikaw pa naman tauhan. Guys, it's beautiful. Look at the sunset. I know, it's nice. So you want to be my girlfriend or something or no? No. Yeah, you want it? Will you be my girlfriend? Yeah. Yeah. Are you trolling? No, I'm being serious. I promise. Was this a surprise? Yeah. Oh, I'm fucking nervous. Oh my god. Really? Yeah. Yay! Yay. It's beautiful. Look at the sunset. I know, it's nice. So you want to be my girlfriend or something or no? Yeah, you want it? Yeah, you want it? Will.
If I change this to like blog 12 or something that doesn't exist and then try to run this again, we get an error up here and an error object, and it says no such file or directory. Okay? All right then, so that is how simple it is to read. Files. Now let me comment this out and go down to writing files down here, which is equally as simple. So again, we say fs, this time use a method called writeFile, and this time we take in 3 arguments. The first argument again is a relative path to the file we want to write to. Well, I'm going to say I want to write to this blog1.txt file. So // to say the current directory, then we want to go into docs, then / blog1.txt. Okay, so the second argument is the text that we actually want to write to this file. So say for example, I want to write hello world instead of hello ninjas. Well, I'm going to write that here, hello world, not hello world. And now when I run this in a second, it's going to replace whatever is in this file with this content right here, hello world. Okay, so the third argument again is a callback function because this, like before, is asynchronous. This is going to take some time to do. It's going to start it, carry on down the code. When it's finished, it's going to run this callback function. All right, so in here, let me just say console.log and we'll say file was written. Okay, so let me now save this and come down here and run the file, node files, and we see this log to the console. And if we go to blog1, we see hello world. Before it was hello ninjas, so it replaced that with the new content. Okay, so what if we tried to do this right here with a file that didn't actually exist? So say for example blog2. Let me change this to hello again. What would happen now, because this doesn't exist? Would we get some kind of error? Well, no. What would happen is it just creates this file for us if it doesn't exist. So if I run this again, node files, we see file was written twice, and now we see blog2 up here as well. Hello again. All right. So there we go. That's writing files. Again, really simple to do. All right. So down here, let me talk about how we work with directories. So say, for example, I want to create a new folder called assets or something like that. Well, I can do that by using a method on the FS module called mkdir. That stands for make directory. And this is going to make a directory for us. We just need to specify what directory to make and where. So I'm going to say make it in the current directory, // then create a directory called assets. Again, this is an asynchronous task. It takes some time to do. We fire a callback function when this is done. And inside this callback function, we can take in an error object if there was an error. So I'm going to check if there's an error first of all. If error, then we'll log that to the console. And then down here as well, I'll also say console.log folder created. Okay.
Do you want to start building AI applications but don't know where to begin? Join the Langflow AI competition and learn by doing.
All right then, so let's run this and see if it works. Node files, and we see now this assets folder is created. Awesome. Now, what happens if we try to run this again? Because now we already have the folder. So if we run it again, we're going to see we get an error object right here. File already exists. So it's saying, look, there's an error because this folder already exists and I can't remake it. It's already there. So before we run code like this, it would be a good idea maybe to check if the folder exists first of all, and then only run the code if it doesn't exist. All right, so let's do that. I'm going to say if, and then inside parentheses, I'm going to use a method on the FS module called exists sync. And this is a synchronous method, meaning it will block the code. It's only going to take a very short amount of time to do though, and it's going to check if something exists. Now, I want to check if the assets folder exists. So I want to say /assets like so. Now, inside curly braces, I want to output this stuff right here. But at the minute, this doesn't make much sense because if it exists, then this is going to return true and it's going to try to make it. But we don't want that because we only want this to run if it doesn't exist, okay? So I want to reverse the result of this, and I can do that by placing an exclamation mark in front of it. So now, if this does exist and it returns a truthy value, this right here will negate it and turn it into a falsy value. Therefore, this will only run if this doesn't exist, okay? All right, so let's try this. And if we come down here again and say node files, now we get no error because it's not running this code. So if I delete this though, let me just delete it and run it again, then it should run and create that folder for us again. All right. Okay, so let's also add an else clause to this so we can remove the directory. So we're saying, okay, only run this code right here if this doesn't exist, this assets folder. If it does, then we'll run this else clause and we'll remove the folder instead. So to do that, we'll say fs.rmdir, remove directory. What do we want to remove? Well, we want to remove /assets. Again, this is asynchronous. We fire a callback function when this is done. And inside the callback function, we can take in the error object if there is one. We're going to log that to the console if there's an error. So if error, console.log error. And something's gone wrong here. Okay, I need to just put parentheses right here and take them off here. And then down here, I want to say console.log folder deleted. Okay, so let's try all this out. I'm going to say node files, and it deletes the folder because this ran. And if I run it again, node files, it creates the folder this time because this ran. And I can keep on doing this, and it's going to delete and create the folder depending on whether it exists or not already. Pretty good, right? Okay then, so one more thing. I want to show you how to delete files. and I can keep on doing this, and it's going to delete and create the folder depending on whether it exists or not already. Pretty good, right? Okay then, so one more thing, I want to show you how to delete files, and this is pretty simple. But again, I want to make sure that a file actually exists before we go and delete it. So I'm going to do a little check first of all to say if fs.exists sync, like we did before, and I'm going to look for a file which is in the docs folder and then delete me.txt. So I'm going to create a new file inside docs called delete me.txt. We don't need to put anything inside it, but now this is going to look for this delete me file, and if it exists, we're going to fire some code. And now I want to delete that file, and we do that by saying fs.unlink. That is the method we use to delete a file. So this time I want to specify that I want to delete the file which is in the docs folder, and it's delete me.txt. And then the second argument is a callback function. Again, we can take in an error object if there is one. We can check if there is down here. If error, then we're going to console.log the error. And also, oops, I keep making this mistake. Let me just change that. Okay. And also down here, we want to say console.log, and we're going to say file deleted. Okay. So now if the
Ayan yung mixer niya, pangalan ng mixer niya. Ito ng mixer, bago mapuno ito. Bibigyan natin ng dragon. Nag-iisang banda, mga idol. Nag-iisang hula lang. Hindi pwede yung dalawang hula mo. Kasi ma-disqualified ka. Ito, kung ilang mixer na ito na bago mapuno. Kung sino makakahula, bibigyan natin ng dragon, mga idol. Dalawang unang makakahula. Ayan o. Kita nyo naman kung gano'n pa kalaki ang pupuhutan. Ayan o. Ilang mixer, bago mapuno ito. Hoy, tara na! Uwi na tayo! Bilis talaga rin mo ipag-uwian. Para makahabol pa natin si kumpare. Yan. Talaga sure na itong ginawa mo, boy. Ingat-ingat, boy. Yan ang mga tirado ni boy, oh. Walang katakot-takot. Hoy, tara na! Uwi na tayo! Bilis talaga rin mo ipag-uwian. Para makahabol pa natin si kumpare. Yan. Talaga sure na itong ginawa mo, boy. Ingat-ingat, boy. Yan. Yan ang mga tirado ni boy, oh. Walang katakot-takot. Hoy, tara na! Uwi na tayo! Wait up. Excuse me, Manu. What is she doing? She's having a new dessert. It's called the blue ice cream. Okay, can I try some? No. Thank you. How much is it? $88. $88? Are you kidding me? Yes, but we do have a discount. If you're willing to eat it and say woo, woo, we'll give you a 50% discount. What? Kay Kuya Naruto. Kay Naruto? Alam kasi namin na hindi makakakuha ng isang si Kuya Naruto. Kapag nangyari yun, hindi siya magiging Chunin. Yung ba na kaya sinubukan niyo siyang palitan? Kayo mag-exam para sa kanya? Wala kayong dapat ipag-alala sa kanya. Alam niyo si Naruto, siya yung tipong gagawin ng lahat para maging Hokage. Ito pa kaya ang uurungan niya? Tama siya. Sa pag-uwi niya rito, sasalubungin natin siya na madamis sa ngipin. Naiintindihan ko na. Yung susunod. Ay, may mga Nothing beats a Jet 2 holiday. And right now, nothing beats a Jet 2 holiday. And right now, nothing beats a Jet 2 holiday. And right now, hindi ko alam kung ano talaga ang totoong nangyari. Pero bigla nahinto ako ng sunod na exam. Dahil sa mga kakaibang pangyayari na ganap sa bahay ng Konfa at dahil nga doon, walang dineklarang panalo. Kaya lang, nabahanga mo ng mayapa ikatlong Hokage sa pinakita mo pakikipaglaban. Kaya nirekomenda ka niya na iangat sa pagiging Chunin. Ganun din ang opinyon ng mga nanood ng Panginoong May Lupa, examiners at Johnnies. Sa madaling salita, hindi sa susuri ko lang ang iyong sa akin. Kaya magmula ngayon, aasahan ko na isusuot mo na ang forehead protector na yan na may pagmamalaki. Congratulations! Mula sa araw na ito, isa ka na ang Chunin. Palagay ko sa'yo kahit sa panaginip ng virus. Nagpapala ako. Yan? Huli pa, tuloy na natin ang pagdiriwang para sa promoter si Camaro. Magsaya tayo nga ba? Kahit na na! Bakit? Huwag ka naman kumain at parati sa kinukongratulate. Sino? Baka kasi masunod sayang naman. Okay lang, marami tayong pagkain. Kain na! Koji, ma-hospital ka na naman yan. Huyain mo mabuti ang pagkain ko para malasahan mo naman. Okay lang, kahit naman hindi ko muli, nalalasakot ko rin na pagkain niya. Ibahin mo ako. Georgie, akin na yan. Ang wakang naginihan ko eh. Kaya uli-uli yan. Ayon nga sa kasabihan ng mga uli at madalas ang pinakamasarap kaya dapat ang napunta sa akin to. Kaya kahit na nagawin kami mo, hindi ako papayag na mapunta to sa'yo, Hilo. O yan. Ikaw naman, Georgie, makinig ka nga. Hindi pa ipaglaban ang pagkain. Kaya dahan-dahan mo para hindi kayo mag-away ni Ino. Isang matakaw, isang bungera, isang reklamador. Pumasito kaya ang buhay ng mga bata ito. Gaano na to? Georgie, wala ka nang ginawa kundi ang kumain. Mas nagkukulang mo ng oras sa training. Napakaswerte mo. Kasi wala kang problema sa pagkain. Nasa masada mo, kailangan ko lagi tingnan ang diet mo. Bakit mo nga ba kailangan mag-diet, Hilo? Siyempre, kailangan ko yung gawin mo. Parang ko, magalit siya ng crush ko. Ganun ko mga babae. Pero, Hilo, hindi naman siguro lahat ng tao may ang gusto ko. Sorry. Kasi ang dami ng mga lalaki, gusto pa yan. Ang dami ng mga babae, sinabi sa mga lalaki. Babae na medyo chubby. Mas masarap kasi yung yakapin. Tapos, ganun din naman ang mga babae. Nakakatawa. Kung ako kay Ino, hindi ako magdadaya na sigurado mas papansinin naman ng mga lalaki kasi mas maganda. Yung medyo ka. Alam mo si Camaro, kakaibang klase ka talaga. Tapos, napakatalino mo pa. Ha? Kayo naiintindihan ko na lahat. Kaya para sa akin, mas magaling ka talaga kaysa kay Sassy at Reggie. Wala silang sinabi kung may kukumpara sa'yo. Ha? Ay, nako. Hindi ko naisip ang sarili ko na ikumpara sa kanila. Basta para sa akin, ako ay ako. Pero si Camaro, dito mo na lang tingnan. Sa lahat ng mga pabuhan ng tuning exam, ikaw lang ang naging tuning, hindi ba? Pero Georgie, sa tingin ko, baka mas magaling ka pa sa akin eh. Hindi ba? Baka nga kapag tayo ang nagkaroon sa isulaban, sino ako sa katawan mo? Hindi rin. Kasi hindi ba sabi ni Sir Asoma kanina, wala na akong ginawa kundi ang kumain? Ang gusto ko lang sabihin sa'yo, ako ay ako. At ikaw ay ikaw, Georgie. Hindi na mahalagang pag-usapan kung sino ang mas magaling sa atin. Ay, hindi ko dapat pakatipin. Sinabi sa'yo ni Sir Asoma. Isa pa talaga namang mahilig ka lang kumain, di ba? Walang masama roon. Paano? Uwi na ako. Sabi kasi ni Papa, umuwi ako ng maaga kasi may tuturo siya sa aking bagong picnic. Alam mo na? Si Camaro. Hmm? Ano yun, Georgie? Lagi mong gagalingan, ha? Ko alam ko ano talaga ang totoong nangyari. Pero bigla nahinto ang huling tuning exam. Dahil sa mga kakaibang pangyayari na ganap sa pahay ng Konfa at dahil nga doon, walang dineklarang panalo. Kaya lang, napahanga mo na mayapa ikatlong Hokage sa pinakita mo pakikipaglaban. Kaya nirekomenda ka niya na iangat sa pagiging tuning. Ganun din ang opinyon ng mga nanood ng Panginoong May Lupa, examiners at journalists. Sa madaling salita, hindi sa susundin ko lang ang iniutos sa akin. Kaya magmula ngayon, aasahan ko na isusuot mo na ang forehead protector na yan ng may pagmamalaki. Congratulations! Mula sa araw na ito, isa ka na ang tuning.
If this exists, we're going to delete it. If it doesn't exist, we're not going to run the code. So I'm going to say node files, and it's going to delete that over there. But if I run it again, we don't. If there is one, if fs.exists sync, like we did before, and I'm going to look for a file which is in the docs folder, and then delete me.txt. So I'm going to create a new file inside docs called delete me.txt. We don't need to put anything inside it, but now this is going to look for this delete me file, and if it exists, we're going to fire some code. And now I want to delete that file, and we do that by saying fs.unlink. That is the method we use to delete a file. So this time I want to specify that I want to delete the file which is in the docs folder, and it's delete me.txt. And then the second argument is a callback function. Again, we can take in an error object if there is one. We can check if there is down here. If error, then we're going to console.log the error. And also, oops, I keep making this mistake. Let me just change that. Okay. And also down here, we want to say console.log, and we're going to say file deleted. Okay. So now, if this exists, we're going to delete it. If it doesn't exist, we're not going to run the code. So I'm going to say node files, and it's going to delete that over there. But if I run it again, we don't get an error or anything because it's not running this code. So if I create it again, new file, delete me.txt, and try that again, node files. If it doesn't exist, we're not going to run the code. So I'm going to say node files, and it's going to delete that over there. But if I run it again, we don't get an error or anything because it's not running this code. So if I create it again, new file, delete me.txt, and try that again, node files, it's going to delete it for me. Okay, cool. So that's how simple it is to work with the file system in Node.js. Now, all of what I've shown you here works really well for small files like we have, but if we're reading from and writing to really, really large files, then it becomes more efficient to use streams to read and write data to and from files. So let's just take a few minutes to talk about that. Alright then, so we've seen how Node can read data or files from a computer now, but sometimes those files could be very, very, very large, and therefore it would take a long time to read them, and we could end up waiting a while to do something with the data before it's even been fully read. Now, to combat this, we could use something known as streams. So using streams, we can start using the data before it's fully been read. So streams work in a similar way to real life streams. Imagine we had some kind of huge water basin or a source of water.
Dapat, views. So kaya hindi na natin pwede itong puntahan dahil may tendency na mas marami pa yung gumuho na buhangin dito pababa. Napakadelikado na nito para sa mga mamamasyal. Kaya siguro temporarily baka ipasara ito para hindi mapuntahan muna ng mga turista at ng ibang mga pumapasyal dito sa Mulawin Boulevard. Yan, kung mapapansin natin, may mga bakal naman yung design. Talaga lang napakalaking baha na dumating dito sa Oriental Mindoro. Talagang yung ilog na to pati ay napakalaki din ng pinanggagalingan. Itong lawak na nakikita nyo ito ay maliit pa to kumpara dun sa pinanggalingan niya malapit sa bundok. Kasi yung tropa, bumili sila ng ref, kaya binigay sa akin yung karton. Ayun, ano yan? Mahilo. Hindi ka kasi ako napag-load. Ano mo? Biglaan. Ikaw? Si Dave mo. Ay, kuha ko tubig. Gusto mo ba may yelo? Wala kasi akong malamig eh. Hindi, lagi okay lang. Gusto ko na ako lang. Tapos, pagkakain mo, ano mag-ugat? Dami. Kaya, bakit mo siya mo ba? Dahil sa Milo? Uwi na nga. Uwi? Hindi, totoo, uwi. Tulog muna tayo. Ano tulog? Ako lang ka, favorite ko yung Milo. Hindi ako makapag-break sa'yo. Bakit bang partner mo? Kasi yung tropa, bumili sila ng ref, kaya binigay sa akin yung karton. Kaya ano yan? Milo. Hindi ka kasi ako napag-load ko ng oras mo. Biglaan yung tingkap. Ikaw? Si Dave mo. Ay, kuha ko tubig. Gusto mo ba may yelo? Wala kasi akong malamig eh. Diyan, nag-ilaw ka lang. Ito ko nakakuha na.
After all the silence and loud back.
Sa mga magpapagawa ng hagdanan, kainis ka. Yung napatitig si Daniel sa katawan ni Maris dito. Yung napatitig si Daniel. Kaya ako ganyan yung nakwento sa akin ni Shira, di ba? Kaya mabuti na rin na nag-iingat tayo. Sandali lang. Hindi naman siguro nila tayo. Hoy, ang guess. Siguro, tol. Lahat.
In the docs folder and then delete me.txt. So I'm going to create a new file inside docs called delete me.txt. We don't need to put anything inside it, but now this is going to look for this delete me file. And if it again, new file, delete me.txt, and try that again, node files, it's going to delete it for me. Okay, cool. So that's how simple it is to work with the file system in Node.js. Now, all of what I've shown you here works really well for small files like we have, but if we're reading from and writing to really, really large files, then it becomes more efficient to use streams to read and write data to and from files. So let's just take a few minutes to talk about that.
Guys, stop scrolling. What if your YouTube binge sessions could actually make you smarter? Yep, this tool turns any video you watch into...
Alright then, so we've seen how Node can read data or files from a computer now, but sometimes those files could be very, very, very large, and therefore it would take a long time to read them, and we could end up waiting a while to do something with the data before it's even been fully read. Now, to combat this, we could use something known as streams. So using streams, we can start using the data before it's fully been read. So streams work in a similar way to real life streams. Imagine we had some kind of huge water basin or a source of water somewhere, and then also imagine we had a pool that needs filling up with water from that basin. Now, one option would be to get a huge tank, fill it up completely with the full amount of water we need to fill the pool, and then deliver it to the pool and empty all of the water in it at once to fill it. Now, that means that you'd have to wait a really long time while the tank fills up initially, and then deliver it to the pool all at once. Now, the other option would be to have a stream that delivers the water, and that way it fills up the pool a little bit at a time, but we can start using the pool with a bit of water in it almost straight away. So the same logic applies with data. So now imagine we have a huge, large data source, some kind of huge file, and we want to read it. We could wait until all of it's been read and then do something with it, but that could take a long time. Or we could pass the data a bit at a time through a stream. And this way, small chunks of data are packaged up into what's known as a buffer and then sent down the stream every time the buffer fills. So every time we get a new chunk of data from the buffer, we can start using it. Now, you get this in action when you're probably streaming something on Netflix or YouTube, where little bits of data are sent to the browser a bit at a time so you can start watching straight away without having to wait for the whole video to load initially. So that's the theory behind streams and buffers. Now let's see them in action. Alright then, so there are a couple of different types of streams that I want to show you, read streams and write streams. Now, we read data via read streams and we write data via write streams. Pretty obvious, right? So, I've already created this streams.js file where I'm working from, and I've required the FS module, which we will be using to create these different streams. I've also created another document, blog3.txt, inside the docs folder, and this time it contains a lot more content, so it's a larger file than we worked with before. It's not a huge file, but it's definitely larger. So we're going to create now a stream to, first of all, read from this file. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to say const, and then I'm going to call this read stream, call it what you will, and this is equal to the fs module dot create read stream, and this creates us a read stream. Now, the first argument inside this method is going to say where we want to read data from and where do we want to pass data from through this stream. And we're going to pass it from this blog3.txt file. So // just say the current directory, then into the docs folder, then we want blog3.txt. So that's the first argument. And in fact, we'll leave the second argument for now. I'll come back to that shortly. So down here, what I'm going to say is read stream dot on, and then pass in a first argument, which is data. I'll explain this in a second. And a second argument, which is a function, and this function takes in a chunk of data. So what's going on here? Well, we've created the read stream, we've set it up, and we've told Node where we're reading data from. So it starts to read that data. Now, this right here, this dot on our read stream, this is an event listener. So, you know, like in front-end JavaScript where we might have a button and we listen to a click event, it's similar to that, but this time we're listening to a data event on this read stream. And that is basically every time we receive a buffer of data from this stream. Remember, I said that in a stream we get small packages of data come to us at a time so that we can start using them straight away, or pretty much straight away. So this is a data event, meaning this is when we get a chunk of data that we can use from the stream. And every time that we get a new chunk of data, we fire this callback function and we get access to that chunk of data. Does that make sense? Okay, so what I'm going to do is log this to the console. So console.log, and we'll say chunk. And in fact, above that, I'm also going to log to the console a little message that says new chunk. So we can see at a glance where the new chunks are. Make sense? Okay, so let me now save this and run it. So node streams, oops, not in capitals, node streams, and press enter. And now we can see we get these different buffers right here. And every time we get one, we're outputting new chunk, this, and then the buffer itself, the package of data that we get every time. So we're getting a bit at a time. Now, again, we'd like to see it in a readable format. So we could say .toString right here, if we wanted to, like this. And that would do what we want it to do. If I run this again, node streams, and we can see all that now in string format. And if we scroll up, we should see the message new chunk somewhere. If I scroll far enough up, the chunks are quite large, but let me just keep going. And eventually we see one right here, new chunk, okay? Now, we could do this, or we could pass in a second argument, which is an option object right here. And as a parameter inside this, we could specify the encoding and set that to be UTF-8, meaning it's going to encode this as it comes in, and it will automatically be in a readable format, these letters right here. So now we no longer have to say toString. So if I save this again and come to the bottom and run it again, node streams, it works the same way, okay? So that is a read stream. Now we can also create write streams where we write data to a file a bit at a time. So to do that, first of all, we need to do something similar like this to create a write stream. So I'm going to say const, and I'm going to call this write stream, and I'm going to set it equal to fs.create write stream. Oops. Create write stream. And then inside here, we need to say what file we want to write to. So let's
Which one? Which one? God have mercy upon us. One year. Mercy upon us. God have mercy upon us. No. Wait for it. But have mercy upon us. Connect couple. Sorry, what up, Messi operati? Ay, yun mo parang someone died. Wait for it. What up, Messi operati? See how they prank their mom. Ay, yun mo parang hindi na lang masya. Wait for it. What up, Messi operati? Ay, yun mo parang hindi na lang masya. Wait for it. God up, Messi operati. Ay, yun mo parang hindi na lang masya. Wait for it. God up, Messi. Funny couple. Ay, yun mo parang hindi na lang masya. Sana alam mo. Diba kayo?
Jet2 holiday. And right now, you can save £50 per person. That's £200 off for a family of 4. We've got millions of free child place holidays available with 22 kids. Nothing beats a Jet2 holiday. And right now, you can save 50.
Let's write to a new file. So I'll say ./, then into the docs folder, then blog4.txt. Okay, so now what I'm going to do inside here, every time we get a chunk, is write that chunk to the new file. So I'm going to say write stream down here, .write, and then pass in the chunk, like so. Now I'm also going to write something else to it, so write stream, and then in here I'm going to pass in a string. And I'll do an escape character first of all, an N, meaning we go to a new line in the file. Then I'm going to say new chunk, and then I'll do another new line as well after that.
They're coming straight in. Trust me, I've got nothing.
Okay. All right, so what this is doing is every time we get a new piece of data from the read stream, we're going to take that bit of data and we're going to, we need to say .write here. We're going to write, first of all, this new chunk line, then we're going to write the new chunk to that file as well. So this is how we pass data down a stream, a write stream. We pass through a new chunk of data using the write method, okay? So let's save this now. Notice we don't have blog4.txt just yet, but if I run this file, node streams, then we should get it, blog4 right here. And if we open this up, we can see new chunk and we get all the text. And then if we scroll down a bit more, we can see new chunk and more text, and then new chunk, more text, etc. So we're now using this write stream to send a bit of data down it at a time to write to this new file. So finally, I want to show you something called a pipe, which works well when we're passing data directly from a readable to a writable stream. It's basically a much shorter way to write all of this stuff right here, but it will essentially do the same thing. But when we use a pipe, it must be from a readable stream to a writable one. So let's have a look at how this works. I'm going to comment all of that out, and all I'm going to do is a comment down here to say piping. And then underneath, I'm going to say, take the read stream that we're reading data from, and I want you to pipe whatever you read from the read stream into the write stream. So what we're doing is basically opening up this read stream, reading data, and every time we get a chunk under the hood, it's piping that into the write stream. So doing the same thing as what we're doing right here. But this is much easier to write than all of this, right? So let me now delete blog4 just to show you that this works. And I'm going to save it and run this file again, node streams, and you'll notice we see blog4 now, and it's written all of that content to blog4. Now, there is also another kind of stream called a duplex stream, which means we can read and write through it, but that is a bit beyond the scope of this lesson. So then, my friends, in this video, we've seen quite a lot of the basics of Node. We've seen how to actually run code using Node on our computer. We've seen all about the global object and the different methods and properties available to us. We've taken a look at the Node module system to import and export things to and from different files. We've seen the file system core module and also how to create streams for reading and writing large amounts of